Are there any senators who have not yet voted who wish to change their vote? If not, on this vote, the ayes are 41, the nays are 57. Motion is defeated.
Mr. President.
Senator from Delaware.
Mr. President, I'd like to take a few minutes, if I could, just to speak on the...
Senate will be in order.
Mr. President, would my friend yield just for me to make a
Happy to yield.
statement? Mr. President, we are trying to arrive...
Senate will be in order.
We're trying to arrive at an end to this legislation. We're not there yet. We hope there will be no more votes today. I feel fairly positive there won't be, but we're not ready to make that decision right now, but we should within the next hour.
Mr. President. Mr. President, I'd like to begin my remarks this afternoon and really to congratulate several of our colleagues who worked long and hard on this legislation, and their staffs who worked equally long and hard. Senator Schumer and Senator Alexander, I see Senator Collins is on the floor, Senator Lieberman, our leaders, Democrat and Republican leaders, Senator Reid and Senator McConnell. Anyone watching this debate from across America on C-SPAN might be wondering, why is this important? Why are they doing this? Why are we spending several days, literally, session here in the United States Senate to focus on a nominations bill? Why? And for those folks who might be wondering why, let me just offer these thoughts. This administration has been in office for roughly 2.5 years now. If you look throughout the federal government, the executive branch of the government, most of the positions that require presidential nomination and Senate confirmation have now been filled. But a number, including a number that are in highly important, highly critical positions, have not been. But until fairly recently, this administration looked like what I describe as executive branch Swiss cheese. People sometimes wonder why Washington, why our federal government doesn't work better, and maybe why doesn't it work as well as our states. And I want to take just a moment, if I can, to compare the approach that we use in Delaware, and I know Senator Alexander is a former governor, probably the approach that they use in Tennessee to fill key leadership positions in the executive branch of those state governments. In my state, for example, the governor nominates people to serve as cabinet secretaries in a dozen or so different departments. Those nominations have to be confirmed before the Senate. They hold hearings and generally report those nominations favorably. In fact, I think my 8 years as governor, we never had the Senate fail to report and to vote for one of our nominees for an executive branch department, for example, Secretary of Transportation or Secretary of Education, those kinds of appointments. Within those various departments of state government, the division directors are appointed by the governor without confirmation by the Senate. And the rest of our line items, our line departments within state government in Delaware are not appointed by the governor. They're literally chosen through a merit system and report up the report or chain of command through the director of the division to the secretary of the department, and that's the way it works. I remember when I was about to be sworn into governor, I met with the state senate. It was a majority Democrat at the time, and they were interested in knowing who was going to nominate for different positions, and I explained who we had in mind, and they said, you know, we don't know some of those people. Some of them are from other states, and we're not sure that we ought to be confirming them. And I asked them, I said, look, why don't we make a deal here? Give me the team that I feel that as governor I'm entitled to have. Make sure that they're honorable people, smart people, that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, let me have my team and go forward and try to govern in a partnership with the legislative branch. And and judge us in the end on how we perform. And to their credit, that's what the state senate decided to do. And that's the way we operated for 8 years. They were 8 good years. 8 very good years. I was fortunate to be governor at the same time that Bill Clinton was president, and we managed to balance our budgets, I think, 8 years in a row. We actually cut taxes 7 years in a row. We paid down some of our debt, got ourselves a AAA credit rating for the first time in state history, still have it. But that's the way that we operated. It doesn't look that way or operate that way here. And there's a number of reasons why this administration and the last administration, and I suspect the one before that, a year or 2 years even into those administrations, the executive branch, when you look through the senior ranks of the leadership of the various departments, looked too much like executive branch Swiss cheese. Senator Alexander and Senator Schumer, to their credit, are trying to change that. I commend them for their efforts. It's, I think, enormously important. If you're trying to be the president and to lead this country, you need your team. You need your team. And it's important that they be capable people, honorable people, but at the end of the day, a president of either party needs a good team, a strong team, filled sooner rather than later. But there are a number of reasons why it's so difficult to get many of these vacancies filled. One of them, there's a reluctance on the part of some people to go through the process, the confirmation process. It takes forever in some cases. There's nominees are asked to sort of like bare their, not their souls, and largely bare their lives, and to go through a process where they can be maybe not crucified, but certainly expose anything they've ever done wrong in their lives. None of us is perfect. And I think that in itself deters people from wanting to go through this process. I was once nominated when I was governor, nominated to serve on the Amtrak board by President Clinton. And I remember how long it took just to fill out the paperwork. One set of paperwork for the executive branch, a totally different set of paperwork for the legislative branch. I remember saying to my wife, after figuring like a weekend or two just filling out the paperwork, I'm not sure it's really worth it, doing all this. I'm really not sure it's worth it. And I'm sure for other folks who go through this process, they probably reach the same conclusion somewhere, at least once during the time that they go through the paperwork. We need to have not separate questionnaires. We need to synchronize, homogenize at least the paperwork, and hopefully put it on an electronic form, and so that we can do it electronically, or those nominees can do it electronically one time and be done with it and send it off to the right folks to look at. One of the reasons why we go slowly here is that, and I'll just share with you, I was in Afghanistan, either Afghanistan or Pakistan or one of those countries, and a couple of months ago, and riding around with the Codel and in a bus, going from place to place, and one of the folks in the bus said, you know, I'm looking for somebody to put a hold on a nomination in order to get some leverage on something that senator was trying to get from the administration. And that's with a Democratic president and a Republican senator. But I want to tell you, that conversation could have happened with 4 years ago with a Democratic senator and a Republican president. There's a lot of folks have used for years the ability to put a hold, to stop a nomination from moving forward in order to gain some kind of political advantage, which has nothing to do maybe with the nominee or the nominee's abilities to serve. And the other point I want to make, I shared this with some of our colleagues in our caucus, Senate Democratic Caucus the other day, and I talked to my colleagues there about the General Accountability Office, GAO's work. Every year they publish, as most of us know, something called a high-risk list. And a high risk is just a whole lot of initiatives or problems that exist throughout the federal government that are either costing us a lot of money or are going to cost us a lot of money unless we do something differently. And one of the top items on the GAO's high-risk list for years now has been major weapons system cost overruns. And in 2000, GAO determined that major weapons system cost overrun at the Department of Defense were $42 billion. That's a lot of money. They update that list every year. They updated it for 2010 not long ago. And they concluded that major weapons systems cost overruns in 2010 had grown from $42 billion 10 years ago to $402 billion in 2010. I chair a subcommittee called Federal Financial Management, part of Homeland Security, Government Affairs, and we've held a number of hearings in recent years to try to figure out how can we get better results for less money. How do we get better results for taxpayers for less money, or better results for maybe not much more money? And as we drill down on major weapons system cost overrun, here's one of the things we found out. Through the testimony offered by a fellow from one of the top, I think, 3 people in acquisition in the Department of Defense, a fellow named Jim Fenley, who reported to John Young, who's a top acquisition guy in the last administration, who reported to Bob Gates, the secretary. We brought in Jim Fenley for testimony on major weapons system cost overrun. Again, this is Secretary Gates, John Young, top acquisition guy in the Pentagon, and then Jim Finley. We asked Mr. Finley, I asked him a question. I said, how long have you been in your job? And he told me how many months he'd served in his job. And I asked him what kind of turnover he got from his predecessor. And he said, my predecessor had left 18 months before I was confirmed for this position. So I said, you mean for like 18 months there was no confirmed person in your position for acquisition to oversee the development of these major weapons systems? He said, that's right. He said, I said, how many direct reports did you have once you got into your job? How many folks were directly reporting to you? He said there were 6 direct reports to me in that job, but only 2 of them were filled. You just think about that. Here we are, Department of Defense, hundreds of billions of dollars of weapons system to oversee in acquisition, and arguably the number 2 person in acquisition in the Department of Defense, that position was vacant for 18 months. 18 months. And then when he finally got confirmed, of the 6 direct reports, only 2 were filled. No wonder we have these huge weapons system cost overrun. And it's not just, I'd like to say it's an isolated incident. We brought in Jim Finley's counterpart today in this administration, a fellow named Frank Kendall. Very good man. He came and testified earlier this year. Again, it's Bob Gates, the secretary. There's now Ash Carter, who's the top acquisition person in DOD. And then we have Frank Kendall. And I said to Mr. Kendall, how long you been in the job? And he told me how many months. And I said, what kind of turnover did you get from your predecessor? And he said, my predecessor left 15 months before I got here. 15 months. And my friends, I don't know how good we all are at connecting the dots, but when you have one of the top 2 people in the Department of Defense responsible for riding herd on the defense industry, our contractors, and these contractors are very expensive weapon systems, when you have a vacancy for 18 months in one administration, the next administration, pretty much like a vacancy for 15 months, that is no good. That is an invitation for disaster. And when we see the major weapon system cost overruns go from $42 billion in 2000 to $400 billion 10 years later, I would suggest one of the reasons is because of this confirmation process, the vetting process, and really the biggest problem of all is the administration. The administration. It takes forever to identify people to go in these positions, to vet these positions and actually give us a name. There are no silver bullets in terms of solving this problem. We need a lot of silver BBs, and one of the good things about the legislation before us is it provides a number of, I think, very, very helpful tools to expedite the consideration of nominees, to better ensure that the next administration, or even this administration, a year or 2 from now, if the president's reelected, that we don't end up with more and more of executive branch Swiss cheese, which really translate into, I think, for the taxpayers, enormous costs. Costs we can't afford with the budget deficit of over $1 trillion. The last thing I want to say, if I may, a number of people are offering amendments. I'm going to call up an amendment to this bill in just a moment. And it's an amendment that involves, again, our friends at GAO, the Government Accountability Office. And our amendment's pretty straightforward. It would require GAO to investigate and conduct a survey on the number of presidentially appointed positions that are not Senate confirmed in each agency, a category of jobs that also routinely go unfilled for extended periods of time. And the study would provide recommendations as to whether eliminating or converting certain appointees to career positions would be more efficient. In addition, the survey should evaluate whether it is beneficial to reduce and convert specialized categories of appointees, such as inspector generals, chief financial officers, or acquisition officers, to a career status, not as appointed, politically appointed. And the purpose of the amendment is that the proposal, we believe, would provide an analysis of what is an efficient amount of presidentially appointed positions government-wide, and also provide recommendations on how to further reduce or convert these positions. As far as I can tell, this is not a controversial proposal. GAO does a lot of good work for us to help us figure out how to operate more efficiently, also to use some common sense. And my hope is that my colleagues will see fit to support it. And with that having been said, Mr. President, I want to ask unanimous consent to call up amendment number 517, which I filed earlier today.
Is there objection? Clerk will report.
The Senator from Delaware, Mr. Carper, Proposes an amendment numbered 517
President?
to S679.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to dispense with further reading of this amendment.
Without objection.
And with that, I yield the floor. Thank you very much.
Mr. President.
Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, most Americans have a credit score. We don't know much about it until we start to borrow money. And then you find out what your score is, and the score may determine whether or not you're going to get a loan, or if you get a loan, how much interest you're going to pay on it. Several years ago, about 10 years ago, I got a phone call from a bill collection agency to my home in Springfield, Illinois, saying, Durbin, we finally caught up with you. I don't know how you thought you could get away from us, but the charges that you've run up here at the Home Depot in Denver, Colorado, haven't been paid for months. And I said, I've never been to the Home Depot in Denver, Colorado. I was a victim of identity theft. Somebody got enough information about me to apply for an account there and to run up some charges. And they said, prove it. So I sent them some information, and they came back to me and said, well, we're satisfied you weren't the person who ran up the charges, but you better check with your credit agencies to see what your credit score is now, because everybody's been reporting this default on payment at the Home Depot in Denver, Colorado. Well, I checked, and sure enough, my credit scores, which I never pay any attention to because I don't borrow a lot of money, were terrible. So I went through about 3 months of reconstructing what happened and clearing my record, and at the end of it, they said everything's fine. It can be done. I had to go through it. A lot of people do, too. Now, why do I bring up this example? The credit score of the United States of America is now in question. August the 2nd, the Secretary of the Treasury tells us that if we don't extend the debt ceiling of the United States, that we are going to be in a terrible financial situation. What is the debt ceiling? The debt ceiling is America's mortgage. It's the amount of money we borrow as a government, as a nation, to sustain ourselves. And we borrow a lot of money. We borrow 40 cents for every dollar we spend, whether it's on a missile or a food stamp. And the creditors, our creditors around the world, of course, get paid interest for loaning us money to cover our debt. The level of interest that they are paid reflects their confidence that we will ultimately make payments, be good on the debt. Right now, you pick up the newspaper and you read what's going on in Greece. In Greece, the government, Papandreou's government, barely survived this week because they've had to initiate austerity measures, cutbacks in spending that aren't politically popular. And if they didn't, they were going to watch the Greek credit rating fall even further and the cost of borrowing money go up even higher. So when the time comes, August 2nd, our deadline on our basic debt ceiling, our creditors all around the world will look and see what happens. Well, what happens without fail in the history of the United States is we do the right thing. We extend the debt ceiling. And they say, fine. So the full faith and credit of the United States can be relied on confidently. They made another payment, as they said they would. And we go forward with our business. Now there's a hue and cry, primarily from the other party, that we shouldn't pay any attention to this debt ceiling. We should ignore this debt ceiling. And many of them have made arguments which, frankly, are stunning. Just to give you a couple examples here. One of my colleagues from the state of Pennsylvania, Senator Pat Toomey, said, failure to raise the debt limit upon the deadline submitted by the Treasury Secretary does not equate to a default on our debt at all. I would like to remind him what Ronald Reagan, a president of his party, once said. He said, the full consequences of a default, or even the serious prospect of a default, by the United States are impossible to predict and awesome to contemplate. The nation can ill afford to allow such result. Ronald Reagan. Senator DeMint of South Carolina, Republican, said, quote, Republicans must do everything they can to block an increase in the debt limit, end of quote. Here's what the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, said about this. Failing to raise the debt ceiling in a timely way will be self-defeating if the objective is to chart a course for the better fiscal situation for our nation. Congressman Paul Ryan, chairman of the House Republican Budget Committee, said that holders of U.S. government debt would be willing to miss payments, quote, for a day or two or three or four, end of quote. Here's what the Treasury Secretary said about that. Even a very short-term or limited default would have catastrophic economic consequences that would last for decades. Mr. President, I'm not sure you follow the stock market. A little? If you did today, you know that it's off. And it's off because news about employment is not encouraging. Too many Americans are out of work. So there's a question mark about this economy and where it's headed. Now, we're doing our best to turn it around, and I think we've done some good things, but not enough. We need to do more, and we can talk about that. But if we would, for some reason, not extend the debt limit of the United States, the credit rating of the United States would go down in the eyes of people who loan us money. And what would happen next? As predictable as I stand here, interest rates would go up. People loaning money to the United States would say, if they're not going to extend the debt ceiling when they're supposed to, then we want to cover our bets and have a higher interest rate. What happens when the interest rate paid by the United States of America on its debt goes up? All interest rates go up. Interest rates would go up on people buying homes and cars, on businesses that want to expand or buy more inventory. So can you think of a worse thing at this moment in our economic history? Where the Federal Reserve has announced this week they're going to try to keep interest rates down so we get out of this recession, Congress, if it fails to meet its responsibility on the debt ceiling, would end up raising interest rates. Exactly the opposite of what the Federal Reserve says we need to get this economy back on its feet and get America back to work. Now, this is the introduction to a point that I want to make that has a lot to do with a speech made on the floor today. Senator McConnell, the Republican leader, came to the floor this morning to explain that he's decided that the Republicans will walk away from the budget negotiations with Vice President Biden. Congressman Cantor, who is a leader in the House of Representatives, and today Senator Kyle, one of our leaders in the Senate, said that after weeks of sitting in the room with the Vice President trying to work out some kind of an agreement on the budget deficit, they were walking out, and they did. The two Republican leaders in the room walked away from it. And Senator McConnell said this morning, in explaining this, quote, we're not in a majority. We can't sign anything into law. That's the President's job. That's his job. He's acted as if it's not his problem. Well, it is his problem. This is his problem to solve, quote, Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican leader from Kentucky. As if that wasn't bad enough, the House Majority Leader announced soon after that he is no longer going to participate, as I said, Congressman Cantor. And he said, quote, it's up to the President. Come in and talk to the Speaker. We've reached the end of this phase, end of quote. How do these two things come together? How does this breakdown, the Republican walkout on budget negotiations and the extension of the debt ceiling come together? Well, we can't pass the debt ceiling, extend the debt ceiling, without the support of the House Republican majority and without the support of Republicans in the United States Senate. And they have said they will not vote for it unless we have an agreement on the budget. Well, the clock is ticking, Madam President. At this point, we know August 2nd is looming, and we know that if we fail to extend the debt ceiling, it'll be absolutely the worst thing we can do for the American economy at this moment in time. If there was ever a time when both political parties really ought to stop making some of these speeches and come together and work it out, this is it. And what it means is that both sides, our side on the Democrat, their side on the Republican, have to come together and put everything on the table. It means that some of the things we hold the dearest, such as Medicare and Social Security and entitlement programs, we need to talk about their future in honest terms. It means that the Republican side of the aisle has to come forward and accept the reality that we will need some new revenue to deal with our budget deficit situation. That is the reality. I only know this a little better than some because I spent the last year and a half working on it, on the President's Deficit Commission, and then with a group of 4 or 5 other senators of both parties trying to come up with some kind of an agreement. But that's where we are today. And this breakdown of the discussions on the Biden budget discussion because of the walkout of Congressman Cantor and Senator Kyle is not promising. Next week, the Senate will be back in session. The House will not. It is one of their recess weeks. The following week, after the 4th of July, we're out of session, and the House is back in. So for 2 weeks now, we're not going to have both House and Senate here in Washington, and that's going to make it more difficult to reach an agreement. But we have to do it. Madam President, as bad as things are with this economy, if we send a signal that we are unable to responsibly lead on a bipartisan basis, I'm afraid that it could have very negative consequences. I really implore the Republican leaders to reconsider their position. Walking away from their congressional responsibility to negotiate for a good budget agreement and to extend our debt ceiling is the height of economic irresponsibility. It would create a disaster which would touch innocent people across the United States and around the world. What we need to do, and it's hard in this town, so hard, is to try to put this partisanship aside. At one point early in the session, the Senate Republican leader said that the most important thing that he could achieve during the course of this session, and here I quote it directly, the single most important thing we want to achieve is for President Obama to be a one-term president. That was a quote Senator McConnell made several months ago. Well, we're all partisan to some extent, but that isn't the most important thing that Senator McConnell or Senator Durbin could achieve. The most important thing we could do is to deal with our debt responsibly and to get this economy moving forward in a bipartisan way. Running up filibusters on bill after bill on the floor of the United States Senate may give someone a quick, temporary victory, but it doesn't solve the problems we face. We need to work together to create jobs, to pass legislation, to get a budget agreement together, and to extend the debt ceiling. I urge my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to reconsider this walkout from the budget negotiations. We need both political parties there working in good faith to solve the problems of this country. After all, that's why we were elected. Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that Nicole Winters Brown, a legal intern with Homeland Security and Government Affairs, be granted the privilege of the floor for the duration of the debate on S-679.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President,
Leaders recognized.
I ask consent to call the quorum be terminated.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that all first-degree amendments to S-679, with the exception of a manager's amendment, must be offered prior to close of business today.
Without objection, so ordered.
There will be no further roll call votes today. The next vote will be Tuesday before caucus. There will be no votes on Monday or tomorrow. I ask unanimous consent that the pending Coburn Amendment number 500 be withdrawn, that when the Senate considers S-Res 116, it be in order for Senator Coburn to offer his duplication amendment to the resolution, that there be up to 1 hour of debate on the amendment equally divided between Senators Coburn and the Majority Leader or their designees, that the amendment be subject to a two-thirds threshold, that the amendment not be divisible, that no amendments, motions, or points of order be in order prior to any vote in relation to the Coburn Amendment other than budget points of order, and the applicable motions to waive, and all other provisions of the previous order with respect to the motion, with respect to the resolution, remain in effect.
Without objection, so ordered.
I would note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
we're in morning business. If
Quorum.
we're in a quorum call, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to vitiate the quorum.
Without objection?
Thank you. Madam President, I would like to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, this is very much out of character, what I'm getting ready to do, but this morning I was in a foreign relations hearing on Afghanistan and Pakistan, and my staff tells me that the majority leader came down and happened to castigate me for speaking about the fact that we had not really taken up some of the nation's most important business this year, that we have spent a lot of time on bills that were not as important as our nation's debt crisis and other kinds of things. And I can't imagine there's anybody in this body that feels like, as a United States Senator, and it being June 23rd, that we've taken up very serious business this year. I can't imagine that there's anybody that's proud of what we've been able to accomplish this year as it relates to addressing our country's most pressing problems. And so that was the point of a speech that I made yesterday on the floor that I might add, I've had numbers of Democrats come up to me and say that they could not have agreed more. And the point was that we need to deal with our nation's #1 crisis today, which is spending. Talked a little bit about what's happening with the Blair House negotiations and the fact that basically the goal that the Blair House negotiations have attempted to achieve, their aspirational goal, probably is not strong enough for most people on either side of the aisle to want to support, and that we needed to be far more serious about our country's spending problems. However, I know that we're not busy, and when we're not busy, sometimes we say things that we don't mean, and we get ourselves in trouble. And so, Madam President, it's my understanding, again, the majority leader came down to the floor and found a quote I'd made 2 years ago about EDA to try to, if you will, castigate the fact that the comments I made yesterday were out of line. Madam President, I know we haven't taken up a budget here in 785 days in the United States Senate. We have not taken up a budget. What I mean by that is 2 years ago, a budget was passed out of committee, but there was an unwillingness to take that budget up on the floor. This year, the Budget Committee didn't even pass a budget out, so here we have a country that is spending $1.5 trillion this year that we don't have, borrowing 40 cents of every dollar we spend, and here we are in the United States Senate basically hoping that some others will solve this problem for us. And candidly, Madam President, I hope that happens. I do hope that we come to a conclude sometime soon. So I understand how the majority leader would be defensive. He's the majority leader of the United States Senate, the greatest deliberative body in the world, some say, and we haven't even taken up a budget where we spend $3.7 trillion of our people's money each year, our country's money each year. So I know he's embarrassed. I know he's defensive, and I understand that. But I would say that my words, the essence of what I said yesterday, still stands. This body has not done the serious work that the United States Senate should do. We've got a looming crisis coming before us with a debt ceiling vote that's coming up on August the 2nd. To my knowledge, there's been no public debate about solutions towards that. The presiding officer and myself have offered a bill called the CAP Act to try to deal with that. It's the only bipartisan, bicameral act that has been introduced in both bodies. It certainly is not the total solution to our problem, but that coupled with other fixes, some Medicare fixes, that coupled with a 302A top line for a couple of years, to me is the essence of something that might solve our country's problems. So I know that I've tried to offer some constructive solutions to our problem. I know the presiding officer has tried to offer some constructive solutions. To me, those are the kind of things that we here in the Senate ought to be dealing with today. I know the markets, rightfully so, very soon, as they should, will become very volatile, because it's my opinion, Madam President, that we are close to a potential train wreck. I know that people have pulled away from the Blair House negotiations. My sense is that the two sides are very much in disarray at this point. There's been numbers of public comments that have been put forth. And again, I come back to the United States Senate, 785 days here without even taking up a budget. So again, I know the Majority Leader is defensive and embarrassed, and I understand why he would be, but I stand by my comments yesterday. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor. It's the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.